Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fun and funky detailed diatribe. I am today's host and presenter, Red, and I am joined, as always, by my partner in crime, Blue.
Hello, I'm excited to be here. I did homework for this.
You did a lot of commendable quantities of homework for this. Depending on when this goes up, actually, yeah, there's behind-the-scenes podcast discussion from when you were mid-homework discussing some of the stuff I had you watch in preparation for this Transformers detailed diatribe about the movie that just came out at the end of 2024, Transformers 1.
After show for podcast episode 109 if you're on our Patreon.
Yep, yeah, there it is. For all the tea. We're getting back to the roots of the detailed diatribe on this one, because the whole premise of this, the whole purpose was that we would identify specific small things that jumped out at us and really worked in stories we liked. And a lot of our detailed diatribes have suffered a little bit from scope creep. We get really in the weeds on like the summary of the story, and everyone has to know how we got here and what it all means. And the thing is, I'm a big context bitch. I love that stuff. But in this specific case, I was like, oh, I can actually get this down to not just one scene, but like one shot in the movie and how this really works.
This is some real detail stuff we got here.
And buddy, I'm about to start diatribing, so let's go. First of all, we do, however, need to do some scope creep and discuss the big so we can zoom in on the small.
Theory of everything-itis strikes us again.
It's bots all the way down. But yeah, so in order to talk small, we have to start big. And the Transformers franchise is about as big as it gets. It started in 1984, so, you know, a clean 40 years ago. Massive toy and cartoon franchise built on the simple premise of, hey, those GoBots were onto something. Wouldn't it be cool if a bunch of robots that could turn into cars just kick the ever-loving shit out of each other forever? And it worked so good that they've done it like dozens to hundreds of times. There's a lot. This franchise is one of those a lot franchises.
There's a lot of it. I think we nowadays can see like, oh yeah, you know, Transformers exists, but it feels kind of in the background nowadays compared to the deluge of the Bay films, where it was like truly one of the biggest media properties of the late 2000s, early 2010s.
Oh,
but
man, yeah.
I think that weird different blip obscures the fact that this franchise has been kind of everywhere for 40 years.
It's massive. There's always something going on in it. As soon as one show ends, another one cycles in. There's always new toy lines and video games happening. But that's not relevant right now. Similar to the space of like superhero comics, there's an absolute snake pit of continuity, but there are a few salient details that are really all we need when we're going into a new installment of the franchise. It boils down cleanly to four crisp bullet points. They are Transformers, which are robots in disguise. They are alien robots from outer space, the planet Cybertron. They're currently hiding out on Earth. They disguise themselves as ordinary vehicles and occasionally dinosaurs.
What if the Dinobots showed up before humans discovered dinosaurs in the mid-1800s? So humans are like, what the fuck are those?
I have a few episodes of Transformers Prime that you could watch about that. But there's a very funny bit where like Predacons inspired some mythology on Earth, so a robot dragon shows up, and one of the human sidekicks is like, is that a dragon? And the bots are like, what's a dragon? Anyway, but yes, so they're split into two camps. There's Autobots, which are the good guys, and Decepticons, which you may or may not be able to decipher this from their extremely subtle naming conventions, but they are evil, in fact. They're evil and bad.
When I first learned what these words meant when I was younger, I was like, yes, the car robots and the liar bads.
The funny thing is, they keep trying to retcon like that Autobot means something more nuanced or meaningful. It's like this: the Autobots believe in autonomy for all living things, and that's why. It's like, sure, we know it's because they turn into automobiles. But yes, they've been at war for a super long time, millions of years. They don't really age, they just get dinged up and then rebuilt. And the boss of the Autobots is Optimus Prime, and the boss of the Decepticons is Megatron, and they're mortal enemies now, but there was a time long ago when they were friends. And this automatically is a very juicy starting core premise for these characters that otherwise do not have to be complicated. They're robots that turn into cars. I have to
And they usually aren't.
They usually aren't. I must stress that usually the robots that turn into cars and punch each other, they don't have to get more nuanced than this. Everything else is icing on the cake. This is already the beating heart the franchise has grown around, is just how cool this simple visual is. But just that little bit of backstory, they are currently mortal enemies that would, kill each other without a thought, but there was a time when they were besties, that automatically adds nuance and gravitas and pathos. And there's always this question underpinning this kind of dynamic. You know, the story of their tragic breakup adds weight and depth, and there's this underlying question of, like, there was a time when they were on the same side. Could that ever happen again? But this is a seriously challenging writing thing to do, because in order to make this work, the dynamic between these characters has to be convincing both when they are mortal enemies in the present timeline of the story, and back in the day when they were best friends. And in order for that to work, the character development needs to be handled pretty carefully to avoid the dreaded Revenge of the Sith-ening of the character has simply decided that they are evil now.
Yeah, I recognize the difficulty of that in not just Transformers media, but in anything writing a character dynamic that evolves from friends to enemies and is not just, oh yes, we, you know, when we came up with this toy line in 1984, we have them as enemies and we just wrote that they used to be friends and we're not really touching it because that's complicated.
Yep.
Actually writing it to be compelling in both is it's not the hardest writing challenge you can have, but it is one of the harder writing challenges to overcome.
Exactly.
And most Transformers media does not bother to do that because it is complicated.
Yeah, and you also don't really have to. Again, this is a war that's been going on for like millions of years canonically. It's like they were friends millions of years ago. There's been a lot of war crimes since then. Like, they're allowed to not like each other anymore.
Yeah, sometimes the tragedy just remains implicit tragedy, but I think, as we'll see, some media is good at making it explicit.
It is, yes.
Compelling.
First, I do want to delve a little bit into the Transformers homework I assigned you before you had to watch the actual main movie, because as you completely slid off of Transformers when you were, you know, at the formative age to watch it, the whole Optimus-Megatron dynamic is mostly a hypothetical to you, so I was like, okay, I can cherry pick some episodes of Transformers Prime, my show of choice, to highlight, like, when I went into this movie, what standard was I holding it to of, like, how nuanced do I need to believe this dynamic can become if we're about to see how it all began. So I personally think that the standout bit of the writing in this show is the way that they do the dynamic between Optimus and Megatron and how it evolves. They've got the soulmates for murder thing down pat, and it's also very funny because it's a profoundly asymmetrical relationship. Like, Megatron is the one who's hung up on, like, only I can defeat him. He's my nemesis, and Optimus is just like, please, for the love of God, stop talking. And it's so funny.
It's very funny that Megatron keeps, like, getting to the point where Optimus is about to die, but then keeps, like, kicking the table out from under himself because he has to be the one who kills Optimus. So he has this whole alliance with the evil Transformer in the heart of Earth, and then is like, wait a minute, what do you mean this other guy's gonna kill Optimus instead? No, so he teams up with the Autobots to defeat the Transformer that is just the planet Earth, so that he can eventually kill Optimus himself later. It's great.
It's so funny. And that's part of why I wanted to, the main part of the homework that I assigned was a 6-episode block, starting with Season 1, Episode 24, and ending in Season 2, Episode 3, which I loosely call the Orion Pax arc. As mentioned, the big threat at the end of Season 1 is Unicron, which is a traditional big, scary threat in Transformers. He's like the evil version of Cybertron itself. And in this show, it turns out he's at the center of the Earth and has actually been the whole time. And now he's waking up, which is very bad news for Earth. Megatron has spent this entire season being like, yes, I serve Unicron. The dark energon flows through my veins, which I have, even though I'm a robot. And then as soon as he goes to Unicron and is like, hey, boss, I pledge myself to you, Unicron is like, no, fuck you. Why would I need a servant? And what do you mean you haven't even killed Prime? There's a Prime still running around? That's a bullshit. Don't worry, I'll do it myself. And Megatron's like, the fuck did you just say to me? And then he just goes and is like, hello, I am a good guy now. I mean, obviously, not that much, but he's like, nobody gets to kill Optimus but me. And I offered Unicron nicely to kill him for him, and he said no. So I guess he doesn't get to kill him either.
And it's funny, because, like, Optimus basically looks at Megatron and says the equivalent of, you're so horny it makes you stupid, and then they go to, like, solve the plot.
Yeah, basically. But the thing that makes this interesting, because the thing is, like, there's tons of enemy mine scenarios and tons of stories, and a lot of them are quite interesting, but it's pretty basic to have it be like, I'm the only one allowed to defeat you, so I'm teaming up with you to beat this greater threat. Unicron is a textbook Mecha Godzilla at the end of this season. He's like, I'm the greater scope threat to force you guys to team up and to stop me. What elevates this, in my estimation, to make it more interesting, is that due to the complex shenanigans they have to do to put Unicron to sleep forever, Optimus Prime loses all of his memories of being Optimus Prime. So he, as far as he knows, is slammed right back to the beginning of his character development before he became, qualified to get the Matrix of Leadership, when he was best friends with a gladiator named Megatronus. And so he wakes up and is like, hey, Megatronus, what the fuck is going on? And Megatron is like, oh, what an interesting opportunity this is.
Yeah. You see the literal gears turning in his head. He's like, oh, an opportunity.
Yeah, because initially he's just going to backstab him, obviously. It's like, all right, now that that's out of the way, I can stab my good buddy Optimus Prime. And Optimus is like, Megatronus, where are we? It's like, oh. So for the next 3 episodes, Megatron just has like an amnesiac Orion Pax to play with. And it's quite interesting to me. There's nuances there. My personal favorite part of this is that it's clear that, like, on the one hand, Megatron is like, it's so fun to have him back. But on the other hand, he's like, he's no Optimus Prime. He's not as much fun when he can't kick my ass, And at the same time, Orion Pax has the good heart that we've come to know in Optimus, but he doesn't have like 4 million years of profound sadness layered on top of it. And he's kind of naive and is being actively lied to by Megatron and the rest of the Decepticon command that he, the small number of them that Megatron lets near him. But he's still got like a moral compass and a brain, and he kind of puts together pretty quick that like, something's not adding up here, and I think maybe Megatron must be stopped no matter the cost, actually. And Megatron,
with the help of the intervention of Starscream,
well, yes,
who shows up back into the plot after some number of episodes away.
Yeah.
Where Orion Pax is like, hey, Megatronus, why is it that your guys are called the Decepticons? And Megatron is like, it's Autobot slander. If speaking truth to power is a lie, then let us brand ourselves with that.
It's okay, Optimus, we can reclaim it.
Starscream shows up and is like, hey, Megatron lies all the time, right?
It's great. I love when Starscream accidentally ruins everything for the bad guys. But I think this is a really interesting little glimpse in like what their dynamic could have been before the aforementioned 4 million years of war. And like we get this glimpse at who Orion Pax was, but we don't really get details about who Megatron used to be before he became this, war criminal that will not stop causing problems on purpose.
But also, we don't really get to see that much of it, because we get to see, Orion Pax, but the backstory is presented in low-budget montage mode with narration, which is automatically like, oh, this would have been more interesting to see.
Yeah.
So it's I liked the show for what it was, but I couldn't help getting snagged on like, yes, this is very much like a show that skews younger. There are like human characters that are children that hang around the Transformers because that's the demographic we are trying to appeal to.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of just like weird nonsense seeping through and getting in the way of what is objectively the good stuff. So as I was watching it, I was like, what would it be like if there was a Transformers media with no bullshit attached and was just the good bits?
Funny you should ask.
And then that was answered.
Elegant segue. Yeah, so Transformers 1, the whole premise was basically witness the origin of their rivalry, learn the true story, which is a fucking tall order. And then the advertising did it zero favors because all the trailers made it look like a wacky, fun action comedy. Bumblebee in this is voiced by like Keegan-Michael Key, doing a lot of bits, and like the character is fine, but I feel like they put every single one of his jokes in the trailer, and so everyone was like, oh great, we're gonna what's next? He's right behind me, isn't he? Come on, guys. But then I watched the movie and it was really fucking good. So let's talk about that.
I did not hear about this movie until it was already out.
Yeah.
Which I think shows how badly the studio fumbled the bag on presenting this one to the masses, and it is a shame because this movie is functionally perfect.
Yes.
As I think we will find soon.
For the folks at home, you have to understand, after Blue was like, yeah, Transformers Prime seems fine as a show made for babies, I was like, oh god. And then when you were like, I can't find a flaw with this movie, I was like, oh, okay. Oh.
Yeah, let me present like I was being generous when we were on the last slide of like, I was able to find enjoyment while watching Transformers Prime, but I'm like, okay, I'm putting myself in the frame of reference of like, I am watching a show that is for kids, and I can enjoy myself for it, but it's like, Avatar was made for kids, She-Ra was made for kids, but those are both incredible no matter what your age is. Transformers Prime, like, it's pretty villain of the week, it's pretty, like, wacky little adventures. You really have to get over the hurdle of these cute but pretty annoying kid characters, as was the case with the Bay movies, too. The humans are always the worst part of a Transformers piece of media.
Yeah.
But, like, comparing that to this, which is just amazing. The, like, mental gap that was cleared in my brain of, like, okay, like, I can enjoy this, to, like, oh, no, this actually just rules. Like, this is unambiguously amazing. Like, I did not give a shit about Transformers at any point in my life until this moment.
Yes.
And, like, now I'm in. It's just, it's that good. I actually cared.
I'm gonna need to insert that one bit from Death Note where he's like, I've won, because that's just what's happening in my brain right now. Like, yes, all my machinations, they worked. Man, I'm so glad you like this movie, because I like this movie, but I also really like Transformers Prime, so, like, clearly that's not an indicator.
So let that comparison go to show how much I really did enjoy this movie.
For sure, yeah. I do think that part of the reason why they were confused on how to market this is, like, for some reason, it seems like every time the marketing team for a Transformers show gets any degree of creative control, they're always like, well, no one's gonna be able to relate to a giant robot. We need more human characters and their dipshit friends. And it's like, I promise you, you don't. We like the giant robot. A kid looking at Transformers is not gonna be like, man, I wish I was their little human buddy who didn't get to do any of the cool shit. They're gonna be like, man, I wish I was fucking Bulkhead. That guy's rules. And it's hard.
I wish Gods from Outer Space had to contend with a child's school schedule.
Yeah, so... And then Transformers 1 was like, none of that shit. Humans probably haven't even evolved yet. We're going to Cybertron, and we're dealing with shit on Cybertron. And I feel like the advertising team just didn't know what to do with that. They were scared that people weren't going to get it if they were honest about what it was, so they presented it as something significantly worse. And that's tough, because this movie set itself up with a very tall order. It needs to show how two of the most iconic fictional characters of the last century became who they are. So we needed to see how Orion Pax becomes Optimus Prime, and more complicatedly and less thoroughly explored, we needed to see how his best friend becomes Megatron. And then we can't just have the fucking Revenge of the Sith one bad fight and then they never speak to each other again. This needs to maintain millions of years of war and ideological conflict.
Yeah.
This movie needs to start an eternal war. When I went into this movie, I was like, okay, the only way this works is if this works from both of their perspectives.
Yes.
It can't just be Orion Pax stays a fundamentally decent dude and becomes good guy, and Megatron has bad day and gets Joker-fied and becomes bad guy. That does not work. We have to be able to be in Megatron's head throughout his development in this story. But the movie's really careful about that, because while Orion Pax is our POV character, he's the character we follow most closely throughout the movie, we get a pretty clear look at his best friend, mining robot D16, through Orion's eyes. They go through basically the entire movie together. They're only separated for a brief interval of time near the end, but even as they're put through the same circumstances, we see them start developing in very different directions pretty much from minute one. And I think that they handled this inevitable tragedy in a very fun way. So let's start peeling back the layers.
As for the POV, I think the reason it does work is exactly because they spend so much of the movie together. Usually when you have like a best friend breakup, it's because they're away from each other for 2 minutes, and then that like fosters a misunderstanding between them that is then never cleared up and leads to the best friend breakup turned eternal enemies.
Yeah.
And this movie is capable enough to not do that, and by having them together, the character dynamic is made far more compelling than if like D16 like goes off for drinks at the robot bar and then like hears someone making some really good points and is like, oh, genocide, got it. This is much better than what would have been the easy and worse writing choice.
We had a similar discussion back when we were unpacking Arcane Season 1 of like, there's an inevitable loving relationship to enemies plot that has to happen here, and there's easy ways they could do it. There's the one unforgivable crime way to do it, there's the misunderstanding way to do it, and the show pointedly goes to all those things and then bypasses them and makes the actual schism much more painful for the offing of it, and this movie does something similar. But because we're following Orion pretty clearly, I think it's important to get inside his head. And the thing is, that's pretty easy because Orion Pax is a paragon in the making. He's a fundamentally good-hearted dude. He's optimistic, he's curious, he's quite impulsive. We're introduced to him breaking into a place he's not supposed to be, trying to find information he's not supposed to have, getting in trouble with the cops and running for it. And it's like, this is how we're introducing our hero who's going to become like history's most goodest guy. But it makes sense because what he's trying to do, and we learn this pretty quickly, is that he's trying to find information about the matrix of leadership, which is, it's a bit of like a Fisher King situation. It vanished decades ago, and when it was gone, the environment of Cybertron suffered, and energon stopped flowing freely, which they all need to live, so now people have to mine for it, and that's Orion's job, and it's all his friends' jobs, and he's like, well, if someone found the matrix of leadership and restored it, we wouldn't need all this classism bullshit. We'd just be able to like live our lives in a post-scarcity society, and that sounds great and awesome and would be good for everybody. But he's doing all these things that are breaking the rules, and he's not supposed to be doing that, but it doesn't matter to him because he has this very strong internal moral code, and he believes very strongly that everybody has value beyond the roles they're given by the society they live in, and he does not hesitate to break rules that he doesn't see the value in if he thinks it's in service to this greater good. And it's that deeply rooted sense of right and wrong, that moral compass, and the fundamental fearlessness in the face of peril and punishment that really defines his character at this early stage in the process. Like, literally his introduction is he's getting into trouble.
Yeah. Which is also a great way to do the fundamental backstory of like, there were primes, now there aren't. Problems. That would be, otherwise some pretty boring exposition, but when presented in this context is like, yes, we are learning it alongside Orion Pax, and it's just a clever little bit of writing. Yeah,
there's also just a little minor side note. This is a very different take on Orion than Optimus that we get to know later, because like traditionally Optimus Prime is a very stoic, tactically minded leader. He's not usually just like running around, getting into hijinks, throwing out quips, talking to himself. It's a bit of a lurch to see this kid and be like, that's gonna become Optimus. Like at the beginning of the movie, it's kind of hard to believe. When I sat down to watch this movie with Magenta, as soon as Orion talked, she was like, that's a choice. And like Magenta and I have shared Transformers Prime brain rot. Like that's the version of Optimus that lives in our head rent free. So we were like doing the little comparison. It's like, are you sure that's the same guy? But again, he's got a whole movie of character development ahead of him.
Chris Hemsworth is doing his best, and his voice descends like one note every 20 minutes until he eventually gets to that right vocal range.
The evolution of Chris Hemsworth's vocal performance in this movie, going from young, cocky Orion Pax to a really fucking good Peter Cullen impression by the end of the movie, is like genuinely quite good. So that's Orion's angle, but Orion is not our only protagonist. We also, of course, have to look at the D16 angle, who is introduced, bailing Orion out from the consequences of his running from the cops' shenanigans. D16 and Orion are both miners, they're both mining robots, and D16 is a realist. The world has a system, the world has rules. The way to succeed is to keep his head down, do his job right, and not get in trouble, and being best friends with Orion does not make this easy, because Orion is
not at all.
Orion is constantly running off on some fool's errand, doing something that, you know, some pie-in-the-sky dream that is far beyond what D16 believes their abilities to be. The thing with D16 is that a lot of this feels like he's very aware that he is powerless, and he's coping as best he can. He's like, look, we don't have any strength in the system is shaped in a way that doesn't favor us. We're cogless miners, we can't even transform. You keep trying to do things that are impossible for us, you get in trouble, and then I get in trouble trying to help you out so you don't die in the offing. It's kind of a funny, contentious, like, Orion is the optimist, D16 is the pessimist, Orion is the dreamer, D16 is the realist, and like, Orion dreams big and D16 snarks about it. And like, it's a very simple dynamic, but there's this undercurrent the whole time of like, oh, these aren't just like haha funny personality quirks, these go all the way down. This is how these guys feel about the world. And D16 is a good friend to Orion, and Orion is a good friend to D16, except Orion does keep dragging D16 into these situations that then frequently go badly for both of them. And like, that's not Orion's fault necessarily, but the fact that he cannot stop looking for trouble clearly aggravates D16, and he's always like, this would be better if you would just stop. Like, if you would just chill the hell out and do what you're supposed to, and I wouldn't need to constantly get in trouble cleaning up your messes.
Yeah, the first time we see it is when D16 helps Orion escape from some guards, but every sequence after that where D16 bails out Orion, it is at cost to someone.
Yeah.
Usually more than just them, as we might see in a minute.
Yes.
But the consequences ripple, and as noble as whatever it is that Orion is doing in that minute, people suffer for it. And the movie goes out of its way to show, like, yeah, being a paragon is great, but, like, doing that all the time does get people hurt in some cases.
Yeah. The problem that they start running into when the movie starts happening is essentially that it quickly becomes clear that the system they live in is not actually, like, fine. It's not good. It is exploitative. And, like, they knew that already. It's like, oh, you know, we have an underclass of people that basically have no choice but to work in the mines. There's other words for that, and they're not good words. So, like, we know already it's an unjust system, but at the beginning of the movie, it's kind of implied, like, this is the way things have to be right now because we don't have the Matrix, because those nasty alien bug monsters got to it or something. But it quickly becomes clear once the actual movie gets rolling that, like, oh no, this goes way worse. Orion has accidentally pulled a thread that is unraveling this entire facade, and none of them are handling it tremendously well. So this whole process kind of starts because Orion decides he wants to make a statement. He's very much, like, advocating for, you know, the rights of the mining bots, and, like, you know, we should be all trying to work together to help our glorious leader, Sentinel Prime, who shines with golden light and has angel wings and cannot possibly be bad in any way. That would just be way too crazy and weird. I mean, he's so shiny. Nobody shiny in the history of the world has ever been bad. So he's like, yeah, we should be helping Sentinel find the Matrix, because that's obviously, like, what he's doing when he keeps going on those expeditions to the surface, because that's what he tells us, and we have no way to know whether that's true or not, so we assume it's true. So in order to make a statement, Orion is like, hey, they're about to hold this really big, like, race, this, like, Grand Prix where all the, like, Transformers turn into their vehicle modes and transform, and D16 is like, we can't transform, we can't participate, and Orion's like, what if we did it anyway? And, like, just straight up launches them into it, and, like, all the time, D16 is like, this is a terrible idea, and I hate you for making me participate, and then participates anyway because he doesn't want Orion to get hurt. Like, he's not going to turn his back on him. And they almost make it. They almost win. But D16 takes a hit and goes down, and Orion goes back for him, and D16 is like, no, win the race, go. And he's like, I'm not going to leave you behind, because, again, Orion Pax, Paragon, we can see the Optimus Prime forming behind his eyes.
Yeah.
But then they get absolutely wiped out, and they fully lose, and they're like, we are in so much trouble. And then Sentinel Prime himself shows up and is like, guys, that was great. You're so motivational. The miners are working, like, way harder now, because you've shown the world that miners are capable of, like, stuff that isn't mining, and that's great. Anyway, my horde of goons will see you now. And it's like, so this is kind of the inciting incident, because they get dumped into, like, sub-level 50 or something, and that's where they run into...
Which isn't supposed to exist. There's nothing apparently lower than 40 on the official book.
Yeah, so already we're like, oh, so you're telling me this world that seems so shiny and chrome has a seedy underbelly that is fucked up and secret? How interesting. I wonder if there's more to that. And that's where they pick up Bumblebee, which is great. They just adopt him out of the trash. And they end up making their way to the surface along with their former boss in the mines, who got demoted because Orion went back to save somebody from a mine cave-in, and then she got punished for it arbitrarily, and she's pissed about it. So that our quartet of heroes make it to the surface and rapidly start learning the true nature of the story they're in, which is that, oh my gosh, you guys, Sentinel Prime is actually evil.
Yep.
Holy fuck.
John Hamm, no, how could you?
How could you? He killed the Primes to forge an alliance with the aliens that were attacking their planet before then, and he's basically having them mine the energon just so they can ship it off to these alien bugs. They're not even nice to him about it. Like, it's clearly kind of a raw deal. He just sold them out for basically no reason, just fucked everybody over. But he's in charge of the planet now. He's like the boss, and it's clearly all worth it to him for that. He's not at all interested in finding the matrix of leadership. In fact, it seems to have been destroyed because he wasn't worthy to hold it. So he has actually no investment in restoring Cybertron to its former ecosystem. He just wants to hold on to this power that he grabbed. And then there's a secondary reveal when our heroes are like, yeah, I mean, we have no choice. We're cogless miners, and the Prime that they managed to run into, who's not dead, he was just kind of
napping.
Yeah, just napping. Just having a big slep. Alpha Trion is like, nobody's born without a cog. They have to have been removed. And it's like, oh, so Sentinel Prime is even more evil than we thought. That's cool.
Yep.
Like he stole from an entire generation the ability to transform and thus choose their future and destiny. There's like a lot of it's not complicated symbolism, but it is symbolism, and it's good. It's very solid.
Yeah.
So basically now they learn, like, good news, this movie has a bad guy that must be stopped, no matter the cost. And this is probably the part where we start seeing the biggest divergence in characterization between Orion Pax and D16. Because learning the truth of the world that they live in, Orion is, like, shocked and horrified that Sentinel is evil and is not actually, doing his best to lead and save the world.
Yeah.
Because from Orion's perspective, it feels, like, insane that a leader of a people would ever do things for them that wasn't good for the whole, you know? Like,
yeah.
It doesn't compute.
And earlier, when Sentinel Prime is talking about, like, yes, well, I came back from the surface and still no Matrix, but hey, tomorrow's the Iacon 5000.
Mm-hmm.
And D16 is like, that's leadership, like, you know, doing something nice for the people.
Yeah, bread and circuses,
I heard that
baby.
line, I'm like, file that one away, that'll be useful later.
Yeah. So what I think is quite interesting about this is because, you know, from Orion, like, even though he's been rebelling against this system since day one, this is the first confirmation he's had that the system is actively malevolent and hostile.
Yeah.
And he wasn't just, you know, trying to do what was best for everyone. He was unknowingly fighting a system that was actively working to keep people oppressed. And he's, like, immediately like, oh my gosh, we have to tell everybody. There's no way they would ever let this stand. But meanwhile, in the exact same shot, we see that D16 is furious.
Yeah.
He is so angry. And this is in part because he was more invested in this system than Orion was. He was more protective of it. He believed in it more strongly. He was far less willing to rebel against it, and Sentinel Prime was his hero. And now that he's learned the truth that, like, not only is Sentinel a monster who, like, actively basically enslaved their entire generation just to serve his own, like, whims, it's not just that Sentinel Prime is evil, it's that Sentinel Prime lied to him. He's been deceived, you could say.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing that starts happening with D16 is that in this scene, Alpha Trion is like, hey, I understand none of you have TCOGs, but good news, we have these, like, 12 Prime corpses, perfectly good, just lying around. So how about you each take a cog, you know, pass them around. So everyone gets a TCOG, and now everyone can transform, although they've never done it before, so they're really bad at it. But the kind of idea of these things is that the TCOG lets the Transformer choose who they want to be. Like, the form that they end up taking is something that's, like, that comes naturally for them. And one of the quite interesting things that results from this is basically the first thing we see D16 transform into is a tank, and the second way we see him transform is a massive fuck-off fusion cannon just coiling up out of his arm. And everyone, like, it silences the room. Everyone is like, oh, what? Okay. So, for the first time in his life, D16 has power, and he has the power to choose who he is and what he's going to become, and he is immediately starting to turn himself into a weapon.
Yeah.
So this is where things start getting schism-y.
What a headline.
Thank you. This is when the disparity in their worldviews starts coming to the forefront, because now they both have TCOGs, they both know what's up, they are theoretically on equal footing, and they theoretically always have been. But now they're starting to disagree on where to go next, because Orion is like, okay, we have to expose Sentinel Prime, we have to prove to everyone, you know, obviously the people of Iacon deserve to know what's going on, and surely they won't let this stand, you know, they'll rally behind us and we'll be able to, you know, some sort of proletariat revolution perhaps. And D16 is furious, and there's another moment, another little like, oh, there he is, which is when they're talking about, like, you know, don't you want to stop Sentinel? And he goes, no, I want to kill him. And he basically goes off on a monologue of basically how he wants to take like bloody, humiliating vengeance on Sentinel for all of the wrongs he's done. And Sentinel hasn't even done all the wrongs he's going to do in the movie yet. So, like, this is where D16 is already at like the 1 hour mark.
Is this also where he starts talking about, like, I will never serve a Prime again, because he's so, like, radicalized against the concept of someone having that much power,
I think,
in the form of Sentinel Prime?
I think that happens when they encounter the High Guard.
Oh, okay.
But
it is. Gotcha.
It's pretty clear that, like, one of the things that has been part of D16's character but is now sort of rising to the forefront is his pride, which he has up to this point been kind of stymieing for the sake of not getting in trouble. And it's clear that, like, now that he's learned, oh, the system I was bending the knee to was corrupt and didn't care about me, he's finding that retroactively shameful. And in sort of retaliation, his pride is becoming much more of a concern. And the fact that he was deceived and misled by a leader is making him mistrust the very concept of leadership. And there's a brief conversation he has with Orion where he gets cut off before a key word, because he's like, the only bot I trust to follow now is, and then he gets, like, taken out, and it's like, oh, were you going to say myself, or were you going to say Orion, your good friend Orion, who just lets you, I don't know, I guess we'll never know. But this is still a continuation of where they were established at the start of the movie. Orion is still taking a large-scale view for the good of everyone. And it's funny, like, on a rewatch, I also noticed it's not just in the way Orion is characterized, it's the way everyone else is characterized. Because when he's making his big escape from the cops, and he's, like, running around on the outside of a train, the people on the train are like, oh, it's Orion again.
It's Orion, yeah.
And that tells us...
This is so regular.
That tells us, A, it's very regular, but B, everyone knows Orion Pax. Like, he's clearly sociable. They're like, oh, Orion's running from the cops again. Cool. Like, obviously, they're a little bit tired of it.
He kind of crashes into a wide cross-section of society, and all of them know and recognize him.
All of them know and recognize him. He's a bit of a social butterfly. But that tells us that, like, oh, okay, even if Orion doesn't currently have, like, a leadership quality, he has this large-scale view. He gets along with people well. He doesn't, like, stop himself from talking to people just because they're, like, he even has rapport with the cops that are chasing him. Like, they don't like him, but he clearly knows who they are, and they know him, and they're not happy about it. But Orion's trust in the collective action and autonomy of others, his, like, it's important that everyone has the freedom to choose. We have to give them the information to make educated choices, because currently they're being lied to. But, you know, I trust that they will choose the right thing. Whereas D16 is clearly sick and tired of other people having power over him. And he's consistently, from the beginning of the movie onward, prioritized himself and his loved ones. And early on, that meant keeping his head down and trying to stop them from getting into trouble. But now that he's learned that the system itself is his enemy, that's turning into this sort of boiling rage. Instead of trying to de-escalate conflict, he's now very rapidly approaching the conclusion that this whole thing needs to burn. And it's only partially because it's corrupt. A lot of it is because he's humiliated that he ever believed that it was right. And I just think it's so interesting to see that he's sort of starting to collapse inward in these very self-motivated directions. And his anger and his pride and his growing power are starting to become the only things that matter to him.
Yeah, those are the qualities that the system had been, up to that point, fiercely repressing, and now that they're bubbling up, it's bubbling up in very volatile ways.
Yeah. And this leads to some more schisming in some steps of the plot that happen next. This is when our duo gets separated. They encounter the High Guard, which is like all of the future Decepticons are all hanging out as Starscream and Soundwave and Shockwave and a couple other guys named Wave.
Which Bumblebee does not miss the opportunity to make a joke about.
Of course not. And this is when Megatron pulls out the fusion cannon for the first time, and we every time D16 has a troubling moment, they always show us Orion being like, oh no, buddy, are you okay? What's happening to you? And it's not like, oh, no, we have to solve this with like, D16, no, you cannot choose violence. It's more like, if your bestie, who's always been the voice of reason in your dynamic, it has suddenly started like absolutely savaging people in one-on-one fights and making speeches about how he'll never show mercy again, I think a few concerned eyebrow raises are more than warranted. But they also end up being separated because the High Guard and a whole bunch of their allies end up getting captured by Sentinel Prime and Co. and brought back to Iacon, whereas Orion and Alita and some of the other High Guard are left behind, you know, conveniently buried in rubble so they can't be captured. And this is when we start to see their disparate character development in scenes where they are separate from each other, because when they get back to Iacon, after a little bit of a pep talk from Alita 1 to get Orion to chill out, and she calls him an optimist at one point, and I could practically hear the screenwriters winking at the screen.
Yep.
But he goes back to the minor camp where he lived with D16, and he's like twice as tall as he used to be. And, you know, and they're like, what the hell happened to you, Orion? And we get to see the first of his Optimus Prime inspiring speeches. He's like, he gets down on his knees, so he's like at eye level with the rest of the bots. He knows them all by name. They all know him. It's a very clean extrapolation of where he was before. And he's just telling them, like, here's the truth. Here's what's going on. Like, I know it doesn't feel like we have power, but together, you know, proletariat, rise up, etc., etc., etc. And we're getting a great motivational speech from him. And then meanwhile, D16 is off face to face with Sentinel Prime, not having a good time.
Sentinel keeps trying to knock him down, but D16 keeps on getting back up, which is commendable because he is furious.
That's the thing I think is so interesting, because at this point in the story, these are still heroic qualities. D16 is the only one in this room full of people bending the knee who refuses to kneel. He is being, you know, this pillar of strength. He is single-minded in his determination. He gets straight up tortured with a blowtorch, which is, Sentinel Prime is tremendously fucked up in this movie. when Magenta and I were watching this movie together, so at the beginning of the movie, Orion gives D16 like a little Megatronus Prime decal, which is the Decepticon logo, and D16 is like, oh, that's so cute. And then of course he's got it on his shoulder, and Sentinel Prime is like, oh, that's cute. You like Megatronus Prime? And Magenta was like, oh man, is he gonna like rip the decal? And I was like, you are not thinking evil enough, my friend. So, no, he's got much worse plans for the decal.
Sentinel's like, oh, you want Megatronus's face more than mine? All right.
Cool.
Here you go.
Yeah, you're welcome, bud. And then D16 still gets up, and it's like, damn, that is a display of heroic willpower and just pure fury. But there's this little awareness in the back of our mind of like, yeah, it's heroic in this context.
Yeah.
But
in a story that doesn't have Orion Pax, D16 is still almost completely hero-coded.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what I think is so interesting about this, because at this stage in the story, they're still both doing very heroic things, and these are still completely clean extensions of their former characterization in the movie. We're seeing D16 slowly become closer and closer to the Megatron we recognize, but he's still not a bad guy. He's still on Orion's side. We're starting to see his fury eclipse his concern for Orion and the rest of the team, but he's still, at this point, unconditionally heroically coded. And like, not to continually compare the Star Wars prequels to this movie, but they're not doing that thing where they're like blasting the menacing Imperial March every time D16 is like, I'm choosing violence today. It's like, oh, do you get it? It's scary. Like, no. Still, it's good to have someone on the team who's willing to hit hard and fast, you know? I'm just saying. During the big, cool robot fight, a whole bunch of parts are moving. The choreography is very impressive. The benefit of this movie is that if you are a big Transformers fan, you can pause most group shots and identify absolutely everybody on screen, which is insane.
In the Icon 5000, there's a moment where there's a leaderboard, and I was like, oh, I recognize some of those names.
Yeah, hey, Cliff Jumper.
Blur, let's go.
Yeah, so things come to a head, because unsurprisingly, big robot fight occurs and Sentinel Prime is defeated. And in fact, he's defeated on two fronts, on the D16 approach and on the Orion approach, because Orion is like, we need to get the word out, so we will use the city's broadcast system and the conveniently recorded confession where Sentinel Prime just very obligingly listed his numerous atrocities. Like, oh yeah, what, that I struck a deal with the Quintessons, plucked the cogs from your newborn chests, and it's like, keep going, you know, poison the well, kicked puppies, and this just gets...
Yes, and.
Oh, yeah. Tell us more about the T-Cogs. And then they just project it, and everyone in the city is like, dude, what the fuck? So, like, Orion's approach worked, which is interesting because this is a point of conflict. D16 was very skeptical that Orion's, let's just tell everyone the truth and they will side with us and, you know, right will prevail. D16 was like, why do you believe that things will work out? Things never work out. We have to take this by force. And so it's kind of nice that Orion is proven correct. Like, yeah, they give everyone the information, and pretty much everyone that we see is like, oh my god, that's super war crimes-y, my dude, no way. But Sentinel Prime is also beaten in hand-to-hand combat by D16, which I'm sure must be nice and cathartic, but we know this isn't what D16 wants. He doesn't want to beat Sentinel, he wants to kill him. He wants to parade him in chains and inflict all these humiliations. So he's like got the kill shot, and Orion shows up and is like, hey buddy, hey, how about we all slow our roll a little bit, please? And I saw some people read this scene a little bit unfairly, because it's very easy to relate to what D16 is feeling right now. Like that's the movie has absolutely nailed guiding us to this point in his characterization where all he wants is revenge. But Orion's perspective on this is also pretty solid, because he's not like, no, if you kill Sentinel Prime, killing him will make us just like him. It's more like, hey, starting a new political system with the public execution of the guy who ran the old one is not good, my guy. That's real bad optics. And he's also just like, it's not like killing him will make you just like him. It's more like doing a public execution of your political enemy is literally what he was gonna do to you. Like, it's actually, that would make you like him, so please don't shoot him in the head in front of everybody. And it's not even like Sentinel Prime deserves to live. It's more like, don't kill him this way. It's bad. They don't waste too many words on this part of the argument, mostly because D16 is not in the mood for talking. He mostly just keeps shoving Orion out of the way.
Yes.
Well, Orion...
Let me point my ginormous gun that's bigger bigger than my body at him.
Yes, please stop moving in the way of the gun. And the thing is, like, from Orion's perspective, it absolutely makes sense that he would intervene, because he's been taking a larger scale leadership viewpoint, and it's like, oh, this cannot be how we start a new, more equal society. We cannot just execute the figurehead of the old regime. We have to be better. And D16 is like very in his feelings, and he's not listening. He doesn't want to listen. And for Orion, that's the most distressing thing, it seems, because D16 has been the level-headed person in their dynamic. And seeing him have this really, really awful day and just spiral further and further into his fury is clearly quite distressing for Orion. And, well, it doesn't go so hot.
No.
So basically, this is a culmination. This is a wham shot, is the TV tropes word for it, because clearly Orion is not like, I must take the bullet for Sentinel Prime. It's like, hey buddy, you gotta slow down and listen to me. And he's not expecting D16 to fire, and D16 is not expecting him to be there.
Yeah, we can also read this as there is a Megatron-shaped hole in Orion Pax's heart.
Yeah, do you get it?
Quite elegantly, demonstrated by this shot. Wham shot indeed.
Yeah, so that's fun, and this is the moment the entire movie hinges on, and it only works if it works from both angles, because this is the moment where Megatron has to make his choice. Because Orion just made his choice. Orion's basically mostly done with his character development in this movie. He's like, no, we have to set aside our personal feelings. Like, obviously I hate this guy too, he sucks, but like, we have to set aside how we're feeling to act for the greater good. So he makes his choice, and he immediately pays for it. Another little bit of bonus magenta commentary. When we got to that scene where Orion gets a hole blown in his chest, she said, there he is! The real Optimus would never pass up an opportunity to sacrifice himself. So the reason why I love this scene, why this is what this whole presentation is about, is because the moment where D16 chooses to become Megatron is the thing that makes or breaks this movie. We have to understand why he's doing it so that he can commit to this decision for 4 million years. And the reason is, like, we've been following Orion's POV, but from D16, this is just another instance in Orion's stupid, self-destructive pattern of behavior.
Yeah.
He's always the one who has to bail out Orion. He always has to save him from his stupid, self-destructive plans. He always has to cover for him. He always has to rescue him. And this time, Orion made him the bad guy by getting in the way of his fusion cannon in a stupid self-destructive acquiescence to his personal moral code. It's one more dismissal of D16's feelings and his concerns, and it's for fucking Sentinel Prime!
That's the biggest insult, is that, Orion, why are you doing this for Sentinel Prime? And I think the illustrative thing here is not that it's like, oh, it's his one bad day, but it's enough has changed underneath his feet that the way things are right now would be the way they are forever. Optimus, goddammit, Orion is going to keep getting in D16's way and keep stopping him from being what he wants and taking in this case, in this moment, the revenge that he wants. But it's gonna be something else tomorrow, and it's gonna be something else the day after that, and it's going to continue being Orion screws up and D16 has to deal with the consequences, and it's done. He's seen the world around him change enough that he's no longer okay with that being the way things are.
Yeah. And what I love about this moment is that this is the crux of the betrayal. This is the thing that splits their friendship down the middle. And D16 is not happy about it. He's incredibly distraught. He's not gleefully like, I finally, my chance to destroy, get you out of my way, whatever. He's not like, my life will be so much easier without you in it. This is his oldest and his truest friend. He's not turning on a dime. He's just done saving him. And I think that one line is what makes this work, because that makes it so clear from D16's perspective what this whole thing has been. He's been saving Orion from himself over and over and over again, and the worst thing Orion has made him do, and he's done saving him from himself, and so he lets him fall. So this is basically where the origin story part of the movie is pretty much done, because D16 lets Orion Pax fall, he rises as Megatron, he kills Sentinel Prime with his bare hands, and then turns against Iacon itself, attacking all of the images of Sentinel Prime that are still around the city, which also ends up destroying some large residential buildings, and he's so hype about it. A lot of the High Guard are also getting in on it, and meanwhile, B and Alita are like, oh, the collateral damage. Oh, we have to stop. He needs to chill the fuck out.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Orion Pax is falling headfirst into the core of Cybertron, and Primus itself, spoken for by Alpha Trion, who died earlier, don't worry about it. Sentinel killed him. Sentinel's such a good bad guy. He sucks so bad. I love him so much.
He sucks so much.
He's so awful. But basically, Alpha Trion is like, you selflessly sacrificed yourself for the greater good. Again, it's not like you sacrificed yourself for Sentinel Prime, noted shithead. It's like you sacrificed yourself trying to do the right thing for all of Cybertron, and thus we bestow upon you the matrix of leadership. So he becomes Optimus Prime. These scenes are woven together. We are cross-cutting between Megatron and Optimus Prime having their origin stories, which is as it should be.
I think one of the things that works so well about this from D16's perspective and now Megatron is that he basically feels like Orion has lost his goddamn mind, even though it's like Orion's always doing the same nonsense, but now it's so much worse because he is trying to, from D16's perspective, save this system by not killing Sentinel immediately and theoretically not being down with him just blowing up buildings in every direction as far as his ginormous fuck-off ion cannon can shoot. So from D16's perspective, the city is the system and everyone in it is the system. So in burning the system that wounded him, that stifled his autonomy, stifled his pride, and made him into an indentured servant, stronger words needed, he wants to burn down the entire system and, by association, everyone in it. And that is all completely in keeping with his characterization up until this point. It's like, okay, now we've killed Sentinel Prime quite gruesomely. Everything else burns too. Maybe he thought for a moment like, oh, I just want to kill Sentinel, but it builds and it bubbles up into everything and everyone in this system has wronged me. And here's Orion standing in my way. I'm done paying for your consequences.
Yeah.
I think it works, to your point, super well from D16's perspective, and not just, oh, I flipped the switch of being evil and I want to kill everybody now. But there are these kind of parallel threads of how he feels about Cybertron and Iacon and how he feels about Orion, and they diverge for the same reasons, which is compellingly put together.
Yeah, I think that nobody hates a system more than someone who was deceived by that system. And I think the fact that D16 was basically the strongest advocate for Sentinel Prime and their life lot as minors, that once he learns like, oh, I should have never been on this thing's side, and how could I have ever been so stupid? How could I have allowed myself to be deceived like this? So he's angry at himself and he's angry at everyone else. Apparently, in the script, when he blasts a hole in Orion's chest and then catches him before he falls, and he's like, no, why would you do that? Why would you do that? In the script, he's saying that to himself, which I think is tragic. But the thing is, like, that's the thing. He's so angry and he's so powerful now, and what he's turned himself into is this unbelievably strong weapon because he is shaping himself around this anger and this wounded pride. And Orion doesn't really have personal pride, it seems like. He doesn't really worry about that stuff so much. He's very much more like, this is for the good of everyone, we have to give everyone this information, we have to trust them to do the right thing. He doesn't put himself above anyone, even when he is granted the literal fucking divine right of kings by the planet god itself. He's like, yeah, well, I'm not entirely sure what to do with this. And that's what makes him such a good leader, is that he does not really think of himself as one. Whereas D16, at this point in the movie, will not stop putting himself in charge. Like, he clearly always thought that he was kind of like the beleaguered boss in his friendship with Orion. Like, Orion goes off and does stupid shit, and then I have to go in and clean it up and make it better. And now that Orion's like running around, but the stakes are actually high, to your point, it does feel like there's a certain amount where D16 is like, okay, Orion, you have to stop fucking around. This is serious. And Orion is being completely serious. Orion's been serious this whole time. But D16 is like, I don't have time to indulge your bullshit. We have to stop this, and we have to burn this system down because it did this to us. And he's running out of patience. And then Optimus Prime is here, and it's time for a big robot fight about it. And this is kind of what galvanizes their schism, because, like, Orion's not happy that D16 dropped him down a big hole and then ripped the guy he tried to save in half and then shot his cannon into a city full of people. Like, he's pretty pissed. And Megatron is not happy to see his friend miraculously return from the grave with a brand new look and a fetching boob window. He's pretty pissed. And it seems like he's specifically pissed that Primus saw fit to reward Orion with the matrix of leadership. He's like, Primus gave you the matrix. And this ties in with the fact that Megatron has been putting himself in the position of leader since they dealt with the High Guard before all this shit went down, back when they were still fully on the same side. D16 was happy to put himself in charge of this ready-made army. And then his best friend, who would not stop, from his perspective, just causing problems and, head in the clouds, doing all these impractical things, is back with the fucking divine right of kings shining out of his chest and the tacit approval of Planet God himself. And he's pretty fucking mad about it.
And it makes sense because from D16's and now Megatron's perspective, Optimus Prime has ascended to new caretaker of the same system that represents everything he hated about Cybertron. So him not being exempted from the Age of Primes is like, oh, now you're gonna rub salt in my wound by buddying up with the guys who oppressed us all this time.
Right.
He stopped seeing Optimus, or Orion, now Optimus, as capable of change. He just sees Optimus as a continuation of the system that has done all the worst things in the world to him, and is thus, if I'm blowing everything up, his ass is going too.
Which is interesting because, they met Alpha Trion. They learned that the other primes were genuinely good leaders, cool bosses.
Yeah.
He's still a big fan of Megatronus Prime. He took his T-Cog. Obviously, he likes him. But for him, Sentinel Prime is the face of primes. And it's interesting because now, from both Optimus Prime and Megatron's perspective, the other one has become just like Sentinel.
Yeah.
Because from Optimus' perspective, Megatron is now a brutal leader who's heedless of the well-being of the people in this city that he's ostensibly trying to lead, indulging in his own desires and impulses. And with Sentinel, that was like bullshit hedonism and parties and races and bread and circuses. And with Megatron, it's just rage and burning the system down. From Optimus's perspective, they're doing the same thing. They are not leading. They are indulging in their power over a large group of people. They're not treating this city or this planet like it's their responsibility to caretake and serve in their best way. They're just taking advantage of the fact that they are the biggest and the strongest and nobody can tell them no. And from Megatron's perspective, Orion Pax is now calling himself a prime. He's got the Matrix leadership, so he's got more fucking right to do it than Sentinel did. But as far as he's concerned, it's like, great, we set out to stop Sentinel, and now you're putting yourself right where he was. And I think one of them is more correct than the other, but it's more important that we understand why both of them think this. It's not that they have to both be objectively correct, it's that they both have to believe they are right. We were talking earlier about one of the easy ways to do this is the miscommunication kind of thing. Arguably, if you sat these guys down with a therapist and 10 years to burn, you could probably talk through all the issues they have about why they're projecting this unrelated shitty guy onto each other when they're both entirely different kinds of fuck-ups now. But that's not really the same thing as, I misheard you, and now we're gonna fight about it for 4 million years.
No, exactly. I was like the classic, I was eavesdropping on half a conversation and left before you
Shrek plot point.
Even Arcane does it too. So Transformers 1 better than Arcane, Blue with the spiciest. But it's so compelling from both of their perspectives, where each of them sees the other as representing the worst of the old system, embodied in Sentinel Prime specifically. And I don't think there is an amount of conversation that would let these two make up, really, because what we see happen to D16 is as soon as that kind of yoke of oppression is lifted off of him, he is able to become prideful, arrogant, angry, and all of those qualities only exacerbate the more power he gets. I don't know where it is, if it's in the camp with the High Guard, where he's like, no one will be more powerful than me, because anyone being more powerful than Megatron is an affront to Megatron's personal freedom. So that would remain unchecked. There's no amount of conversation that would really put that away to banish that instinct. So it's so much better than just a misunderstanding plot line or an idiot plot. It is the way they are when they have been able to self-actualize into the best and worst versions of themselves. Becomes irreconcilable.
And that's what I think makes this work so well, is that the version of D16 that we know at the beginning, who's best friends with Orion Pax, is not in a good place. He's the chiller, more realistic member of the duo, but that's because he's been essentially crushed under the yoke of oppression literally his entire life. And it's as soon as he gets power, the fact that he has power becomes the most important thing to him. and
Yeah.
that shapes him from point A to point B. And it is gorgeously crafted and so sad, and I adore it. And I think the thing that, from a writing standpoint, makes this work is that the movie puts the work in to turn D16 into Megatron slowly, gradually, and inevitably enough that we buy it every step of the way. Because let's be real, turning Orion Pax into Optimus Prime is not that hard from a writing standpoint, even if he starts off, young, inexperienced, kind of powerless, quips a lot. You just dial that back a little, give him a few inspiring speeches, hold on to that moral code.
I do think that the idea of Orion Pax as being a little bit reckless, more than a little reckless, honestly, in his younger years, is an interesting change where you do see the sense that he's learned that just because he can sacrifice himself all the time doesn't mean that he is the only one who bears some of the consequences. You mentioned in your trope talk on heroic sacrifices that sometimes a heroic sacrifice can actually be a little selfish if the person in question is myopic enough to not consider all the consequences of their actions.
Yep.
And I think we do see some growth in Orion Pax of realizing, okay, being a leader does not mean just sacrificing myself all the time, because I have to recognize how that affects other people too. We see him get a little more tactical and strategic. So I think, yes, he is definitely the easier one to write, but there is still some meaningful growth that goes on there as well.
Oh, for sure. I love how the movie handles him. There was one tiny little moment when he's about midway, when he's about as Optimus-y as he gets before he gains the Matrix of Leadership. He's got a jetpack now. He's gonna go off on a little bit of a solo flight across the city. And there's just this little private moment where he's like, okay, here we go. And then whoosh. And I was like, that is beautiful. It's in the same vein as in The Batman when we see him bust out the wingsuit for the first time on the building. And there's that little moment of panic before he's like, okay, I guess we're doing this. Showing a character who normally we see them as fearless, giving us that little private moment of all right, hope this works, is just so nice. And there's a steady reduction in quippage and extraneous words from Orion as the movie goes on. And as he gains more responsibility and more of a leadership role, he definitely gets more reluctant to fling himself haplessly into danger, because when it's just him eating the consequences, he clearly doesn't even consider it an issue. But as he takes on more responsibility, it becomes clear that the crown sits pretty heavy. He's trying to do what's best for everybody, even if that means not doing the impulsive thing. Considering how badly the narrative punishes him / then rewards him for doing the impulsive thing one last time, it makes sense that he'd be a little more tactical about it in the future. But he is still the easier one of the two, because he does not need to do any profound betrayals. He does not need to go from best friend to willing to kill this guy. D16 does. And there are a lot of falls to villainy that are just kind of done on a dime turn, where at some point the writer is like, okay, now I can start writing them as a Saturday morning cartoon bad guy. I can just start having them tie damsels to railroad tracks and, twirling their wispy mustaches. And it ends up feeling like they're a completely different character before and after their fall to the dark side. Again, not to continue bullying Anakin, but there's a reason why I think 80% of Revenge of the Sith is better than the previous two, and then the final 20% is worse by far. And it's because that key moment in his characterization is profoundly unconvincing, and he's basically a different person afterwards.
Yeah.
So in order for this movie to function, we want to believe that Orion Pax and D16 were really true friends. They did genuinely care about each other. It wasn't just a friendship of circumstance. It wasn't just oh, and then I learned the dark secret truth about you, and now I hate you forever. We need to believe that the things that made them friends are still there, but they cannot overcome the things that made them enemies. And I think what makes this work is that the movie is very careful to make sure we always know where D16 is at and where he's coming from. Because in the beginning, he's stuck in a bad situation, and his bestie Orion, despite how much he likes him, despite how much Orion goes out of his way to do nice things for him, most of what Orion does makes his situation worse. Because D16 is too loyal to leave him to his own devices, and Orion truly does not care what happens to him as long as he's serving some greater good. Whereas D16 does care what happens to him, and he cares what happens to himself, and that already is a recipe for conflict. Sprinkle in the reveal of the profound betrayal, and now D16 has an extremely good reason to be angry at Sentinel Prime, at everything he represents, at the system around it that allowed this to happen, at the Primes who failed to protect them from it, and now he has this power to become whatever he wants, and what he wants is to become too powerful to ever be subjugated again. Orion is thinking big, and his perspective only gets bigger as he becomes closer to becoming Optimus Prime. D16 is thinking smaller and smaller.
Narrows in.
And at some point, his worldview shrinks past the point of Orion. And the thing is, that doesn't just happen on its own. That happens in the key moment where he chooses to let him fall. Because in that moment, he still cares very deeply about Orion and his well-being, but at some point, a little switch flips in D16's head and is like, I cannot keep protecting you from yourself. I cannot keep saving you from yourself. So I'm done.
He realizes it's going to be like this forever. It's really funny that your wording is on the nose here of like, he has the power to transform into a weapon. They actually made Megatron transforms into a giant handgun, like kind of the like meta narrative of D16's arc. And it works, and I'm so mad they made that work. That Megatron gun is actually exactly what happens in this movie.
It's so fucking funny. He's speedrunning a reverse Iron Giant. Yeah, the turning point in this is the moment when he chooses to let Orion fall. Orion did what he always does, fling himself into danger, following personal moral code and ideas of the greater good, heedless of personal consequences, but now he's made it D16's fault, and that's the moment that D16 chooses to betray him by letting him fall. And even if we're on Orion's side, we still understand why D16 makes this choice. Because arguably, from his perspective, Orion's kind of been betraying him all movie by dragging him into these situations that wear him down. There's even a moment in the cave after they've learned the truth where he's like pissed at Orion for having him learn this. Like, he's clearly just mad at everybody, but he's like pissed that Orion had to rock the boat and get them to participate in this race, so they had to learn the truth that this system has been a lie this whole time. And it's like, obviously, he's mostly mad at the system, but he's clearly not good at compartmentalizing that. Like, he's pissed at Orion.
Did he say, like, why couldn't you just, like, stay on program or whatever it was?
Yeah, basically.
Stay on protocol?
Yeah, why couldn't you have just done what you were supposed to? Now I'm stuck in this boiling cauldron of rage, and there's nothing I can do about it. And then when he has the power to actually do something about it turns out boiling cauldron of rage makes pretty good fusion cannon ammo. And, you know, this whole movie hinges on this moment not being a quickly regretted spur-of-the-moment bad decision. It has to be committed to for 4 million years. And I think they pull it off. It's all encapsulated in that one line, I'm done saving you. And it's so good. And it's why I like the ending song of the movie. It's just about like, oh, I hope you're right there to catch me when I fall. And it's like, oh, he was for most of the movie. And then he decided he's kind of fucking sick of it. Oh, man. In conclusion, 7 out of 10, I needed more Grimlock. All right, the floor is now open to free conversation.
It's funny that, much like the soundtrack to Arcane, the music is very on the nose, so the ending credit song is like, oh yeah, I love turning into a giant gun and ripping people in half. It's crazy how on the nose those lyrics were.
Right, yeah.
Although I was mentioning this to you as I finished watching it, I really like that the transformations actually, like, meant something in the choreography of the final fight sequence, because, like, the rest of the movie has, like perfectly good, you know, fight choreography and you know, races and chases and all that kind of stuff, where the transformations actually do make a difference. Like, okay, sure, like Bumblebee gets little, you know, laser knives on his hands.
He gets knife hands and a battle mask.
D16 pulls out the big gun, and like it's relevant in the story once they get their transformation cogs. But in that final fight, like, they're changing around all kinds of crazy ways. Like, Megatron goes to stab Optimus in the face, and his head just like flicks into his torso to get out of the way. And then, like, his wheels click out and he, like, starts rocketing backwards on the ground. It's so clever how the transformations, not just, like, is he a person robot or is he a car robot? Like, different parts of them transform in ways that make the choreography more complex and interesting. And I have never seen Transformers media that actually does that. I'm surely missing most of it. But in the homework I did, in the movies that I watched, you know, back when the Transformers Bay films were all the rage, like, never have the transformations actually been that interesting in fight choreography as they are right here in this final sequence between Optimus and Megatron.
It's an interesting degree of thinking it through that a lot of these shows will instead handwave. Prime especially is pretty bad for that, because, like, realistically, the bots are way too big to ever transform into their vehicle modes. Like, they gotta have some fucking extra dimensional storage capacity in there, or they're, like, incredibly, like, not dense. It just does not make sense. They are these towering hulks, and then they just turn into, like, a motorcycle. It's like, that doesn't work. So after a certain point, you kind of have to cheat. Like, how do they actually transform into each other? And back in ye olden days, when it's like, these are here to sell toys, so we make the toy first and then we introduce them into the cartoon, like, you can show them transforming semi-realistically according to how the toy transforms, But a lot of the time, like, in the show, it'll be like, oh, this incredibly cool thing, and the actual hardware of the toy is like, yeah, we can't do that. We'll store his dinosaur head in his torso so the dinosaur head can come out, and then the other head gets tucked in there. But, like, they cheat. And in the Bayformers movies, they definitely cheat. Like, the transformations are very articulated, but they're too complex to make sense to the naked eye.
Yeah, it's just like an animation dropped in a blender, and it's like, all right, cool.
Yeah, it's like a scrap heap. Part of what people liked about Bumblebee is that the Transformers designs were simplified to the point where you could actually kind of follow the transformation. And there's a few moments in that movie where, like, Bumblebee's in car mode, but, like, he transforms out an arm to, like, grab a pole to, like, do a hairpin turn that the car wouldn't be able to handle normally. Yeah, and that's the kind of thing you can do in 3D animation, and it feels like the people choreographing this movie thought that was the most fun part of Transformers choreography. And they were right, because, like, there's that bit early on, right after they've gotten their T-Cogs and they're being chased, and they're, like, trying to transform, and they haven't quite figured out how to do it yet. And so it's just fucking them over. It's like, oops, Orion figured out how to transform away his head, but now he can't see.
And, like, D16 is, like, limping with one leg in tank mode. He's like, this isn't better.
Yeah, this sucks. And it's quite funny because, like, we see them all fuck up, and then B is like, and transform! And he gets it almost perfect, and it's like, oh, hell yeah. That's my little buddy.
I do find it funny that they made the character who canonically can't talk the loudest mouth in the entire movie.
Well, he can only canonically not talk after Michael Bay got his mitts on him, because he made that up.
Oh, is that? Well, he can't talk in Prime.
Well, he can't talk in Prime, but that's because that's post Michael Bay.
Okay,
Prime
gotcha.
is often seen as, like,
events.
if Bay was, like, good, and Bay is also aggressively for babies. It's just that Michael Bay's version of for babies is kind of more tedious than Prime.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, but he came up with the idea that Bumblebee can't talk. He has to communicate by, like, scrubbing through the radio. And then they came up with a tragic backstory for why he can't talk that comes up in Prime. I don't think that might have been in one of the episodes I made you watch. No, it wasn't, actually.
I haven't seen it.
He can't talk because Megatron decided he talked too much, so that's pretty fun.
Oh, yeah, like rips out his throat or something?
Yeah, rips out his vocal cords.
Yeah.
And then in Bumblebee, the movie, they do that again. And it's kind of funny because it doesn't even make any fucking sense, because, like, a Decepticon is actively trying to interrogate him, and Bumblebee's like, I'll never talk. And the guy's like, oh, well, okay, if you insist. And it's like, you're trying to get information from this man. Come on.
Deal. But yeah, to bring it slightly back, speaking from a relatively small sample size of Transformers media I've consumed, I watched the G1 Transformers cartoon when I was a little baby. I remember none of it, but I definitely watched it. All I remembered was like which toys I wanted, so it worked. I watched them with Prime. I watched the Bay movies. I haven't seen the Bumblebee movies. I probably should.
You should. It's good.
This is like the best Transformers media, like, on the whole, that has ever existed, because it is the, like, scientifically perfected formula of Transformers with none of the bullshit. Because so much of Transformers is either bullshit trying to sell you toys, bullshit pandering to a child audience, bullshit pandering to a teenage audience in the case of how they treated Megan Fox in those movies. But this is just... It's just the core tragedy that underpins the entire media franchise with zero bullshit scaffolding around it. It's a crisp hour and a half.
Crisp hour and a half. I couldn't believe it.
Only the good stuff.
Yeah.
It's a miracle that this movie exists and is good.
It's unbelievably efficient storytelling, and the ground it has to cover in the characterization department, it flies by, but there's like not a second wasted in this movie. Yeah. And the animation is beautiful, so they can really make it not wasted even a little bit. I guess, like, this is one of the fun detailed diatribes where it's like, this is the crux of the movie without which it wouldn't work, but it does work, and then the rest of the movie is just really good. So
yes, exactly.
And it feels like a good setup for potentially a really lengthy conflict. At the end of the movie, they have to fight off that alien invasion, and it's like, yeah, I'm sure they'll deal with the Quintessons, whatever, and then they can move on to their eternal blood feud, and then eventually Earth can get in the mix. But, like, I don't need to see these characters get that far. Like, I would love to see more of these characters. I'm so happy that this movie did even kind of well, and I hope they make more of them, because I think this style looks great, this cast is great.
Yeah.
For a movie that, let's be real, has a lot of celebrity stunt voice casting in it, they do a damn good job. This cast was really trying super hard, and, like, just the fact that Chris Hemsworth was like, if I'm inheriting the vocal role of, like, this guy who originated the role and has been voicing him for 40 years. I'm going to talk to the man and get his tips and tricks. And like, yes, mad
surprising
respect.
thing to do, but it shows how much the people working on this really cared.
Yeah.
There's a lot of love pouring out of every single frame in this movie. God, it's so good.
It's so good.
It's so good. It's astounding. It's astounding that this movie works so well.
That's really it. It's like, it's amazing that it even slightly works. And the thing is, this is often how I feel about any Transformers media that's good, because I always have to get past the hurdle of this is about giant alien robots that are brightly colored and turn into vehicles. There's a little part of my brain that's constantly on high alert for when I'm being advertised to, and the klaxons blaring anytime I watch a Transformers show can get a little distracting.
Yeah.
But like, it's exactly what it needs to be. It's set out to tell a very complicated, difficult story by covering a part of a backstory that is almost always hand-waved simply because it is hard to do correctly. It is hard to convince an audience these two characters used to genuinely like each other, and now they genuinely hate each other, and this will not change. Except sometimes they let Megatron be a good guy again, but like, it's pretty rare.
In comparison with Prime, like, the way they show the backstory is... like, they showed the backstory, but it is utterly unconvincing. Like, oh, Orion Pax was an archivist and Megatronus was a gladiator, and they both thought the system was bad, but, like, Megatronus was, like, slightly more murdery about it. Like, that's what sets off this 4 million year war?
Yeah.
Nuh-uh. This puts in the work.
And that's the thing. In Prime, we never see Megatronus, the gladiator, in the Pits of Chaos. We don't get the flashbacks to young Megatron. We just kind of have to take their word for it. And I think that works. It keeps it vague, and seeing only half of it through the Orion Pax arc, I think, is actually quite interesting. It's like back when Optimus Prime was a mild-mannered librarian who didn't even know he had guns built into his arms. Is like, yes, I'm very interested in seeing this, and I'm very impressed by the subtle vocal performance given by Peter Cullen to portray that this is younger, more inexperienced, without 4 million years of profound sorrow. But we only get like modern Megatron's perspective on it, and he's mostly like, huh, what a fun little bit of nostalgia. All right, he's outlived his usefulness. And it's just like, all right, cool. This movie had the hardest job in the world for making the Transformers franchise well written, and it pulled it off, and everybody should watch it. It's so good.
It's so good. My experience with Transformers 5, I don't give a shit about Transformers, and this movie is amazing.
That, honestly, the biggest fucking swerve, because, like, I'm so glad you had a good time, because I like a lot of media. I know I'm very critical a lot of the time, but my threshold for disliking a show is pretty high. It needs to fuck up a lot before I'm willing to just stop giving it chances. It's kind of nice when I think something's really good, and then it turns out it's actually really good.
Yeah.
Like, to an objective, neutral audience, they're also like, oh, this fucks. Well, I think that's everything we had to say about this specific facet of this movie. If I rewatch it and think of something else to talk about, I better believe I will. I think that's about everything I had in me, so...
That's everything. Bye!